Have you ever wondered how many secrets people carry with them throughout their lives? How many stories are hidden behind prolonged silences, forced smiles, or distant glances? Today, we're going to tell you a story that begins with a loss, but that reveals much more than just a goodbye. A few months ago, a family was surprised by an unexpected revelation during the wake of a loved one. A young stranger appeared, bringing with him a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about the man they had loved and about themselves. This story speaks of secrets kept for decades, of wounds that never healed, and of a forgiveness that seemed impossible. But most of all, it reminds us that even in the greatest losses, we can find something beautiful. Something that connects us to each other in ways we could never imagine. If you've ever gone through a difficult goodbye, if you've ever felt lost in the face of life's mysteries, or if you simply believe in the power of second chances, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because at the heart of this story lies a lesson that can transform the way we see our own lives and relationships. You will discover that sometimes the true gift is not in what we know, but in what we learn when we face the truth. At the end of that gray afternoon, the small chapel was filled with low murmurs and suppressed tears. It was the last farewell to Antonio, a man who had always been more shadow than presence. He was known for his discretion, someone who kept his thoughts like tightly locked secrets. In that room, among white flowers and flickering candles, were his wife, Clara, and his 2 children, now adults. Trying to understand the weight of the silence he had left behind, Clara felt the weight of the absence of the unspoken words. She looked at the coffin, covered by a simple crucifix, and wondered, "What have you kept from us all these years?" Beside her, her children seemed equally lost, but in a different way. They knew their father, but they felt there was something about him that they could never reach. It was as if he were a book with pages torn out, and now, without him there to explain, all they could do was imagine. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, an unknown young man watched everything from a distance. He wore simple clothes, out of place among the grieving family members. His gaze was fixed on the coffin, carrying a mixture of pain and determination. Something about him caught their attention, as if he carried a secret that no one there was prepared to hear. But what he would do next would change everything. The air was thick with tension, and questions began to arise in everyone's minds. Who was this stranger? What did he want there? And why did he seem so connected to the man who now rested in peace? The answer would come soon, but before that, the heart of every person in that room would be tested. The young man stood on the sidelines for a few minutes, as if gathering the courage to step forward. His eyes roamed the room, taking in each face with a mixture of familiarity and distance. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked over to the coffin, placing a white rose on the polished wood. The simple but meaningful gesture caught Clara's attention, and she frowned in puzzlement. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with suspicion. The young man hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "My name is Lucas," he replied, his voice firm but with an almost imperceptible tremor. I am his son." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's eyes widened, while her children exchanged confused glances. How was this possible? Antonio had never mentioned another son. Lucas sensed the uneasiness in the air and quickly tried to explain. "I know this must come as a shock to all of you. I didn't know he existed until recently either, but he was my father." The words hung in the air like a storm about to explode. Clara felt the ground beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about the man she had shared decades of her life with now seemed like an illusion. Asterisk. As murmurs began to rise among those present, Lucas lowered his head, clearly shaken. He wasn't here to cause pain, but to seek something he was missing, answers. And perhaps, a piece of the father he had never had the chance to know. But before he could say anything else, Clara interrupted, her voice shaking. How can we believe? You? Clara took a step forward, her eyes fixed on Lucas as if trying to decipher him. You show up here in the middle of our morning and drop a bomb like that. How can we know you're telling the truth? Her voice was firm, but there was pain behind every word. Foundations of her life were being shaken. Everything she knew about Antonio now seemed questionable. Lucas swallowed hard, visibly nervous. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and handed it to Clara. Asterisk. This is what brought me here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside the envelope was an old handwritten letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Antonio. Clara recognized it immediately. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The first few lines were addressed to a woman named Maria, and they spoke of an unborn baby, a child that Antonio could not take care of. Clara's children came closer, reading over their mother's shoulder. They exchanged puzzled looks, trying to process what this meant. Why didn't he ever tell us? Joe, the oldest, asked, his voice thick with frustration. He kept it all these years, like it was a dirty secret. Clara felt a pang in her chest. She had always known that Antonio was reserved, but she had never imagined that he carried something like this. Lucas watched everything in silence, his hands clenched into fists. He knew he was intruding on a delicate moment, but he needed to find answers. I just wanted to understand who he was, Lucas said, his voice breaking. I never knew him, but I felt I needed to be here. Clara looked at him, torn between anger and compassion. After all, who was this young man? A stranger or a forgotten part of her own family? Clara sat in one of the chapel chairs, holding the letter between her trembling fingers. She had never known Maria, but the name echoed in her mind like a distant echo. Who was she? Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Lucas hesitated for a moment, as if he were choosing his words carefully. My mother, he answered. She met your husband many years ago, before you two got married. They ... They loved each other, or at least that's what she always said. Lucas's words struck Clara like arrows. She had always believed that her marriage with Antonio had been built on a solid foundation, but now she realized that there were deep cracks that she had never noticed. Why didn't he ever mention this? She murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. It was as if Antonio had lived two parallel lives, one by her side and the other hidden in the shadows. Lucas continued, his voice soft but full of emotion. My mother got pregnant, but he couldn't be with her. He had commitments here with you. Clara felt a pang of guilt. Had she been the reason Antonio had abandoned this woman and their unborn child? She raised me and my sister alone. Lucas continued, but she treasured this letter. She said he promised to come back, but he never did. The room felt heavier now, as if the weight of Antonio's past was hanging over them all. Clara stared at the coffin, trying to reconcile the image of the man she had known with the stranger who now seemed to emerge from the shadows. He was so reserved, she said, almost whispering. I always thought that was just part of who he was, but now I wonder, did I really know him? In the days after the wake, Clara couldn't stop thinking about Antonio. She began to rummage through his belongings, searching for answers that could fill the gaps left by his silence. It was in a locked drawer, behind old papers and faded photographs, that she found something unexpected: another letter. This one, however, had never been sent. Clara handed it to Lucas when he came to visit her a few days later. He received it with trembling hands, as if he were about to open a door to the past. The letter began with a simple but weighty sentence: "To Maria and our son, if I ever have the courage to write this." Lucas felt a lump in his throat as he read those words. It was as if Antonio was speaking directly to him through time. In the letter, Antonio confessed his pain for having abandoned Maria and his son. He wrote about the weight of guilt he carried every day, but also about the fear of facing the consequences of his choices. "I wanted to be a better man," he said, "but I was weak. I let fear keep me away from you. I hope that one day you can forgive me." The words were raw, honest, and cut like knives. Lucas lowered the letter, his eyes brimming with tears. He had never imagined that his father, or rather, the man he barely knew, could feel so much remorse. "He wanted to meet us," Lucas said, his voice cracking. But something stopped him. Clara watched everything in silence, feeling a mixture of sadness and compassion. She realized that Antonio was not just the reserved man she had known. He was someone who carried deep wounds, perhaps as big as hers now. "What are we going to do with this?" asked Joe, who was standing at the door, watching the scene. It was a question that echoed in all their hearts. How to deal with a secret that changed everything they thought they knew about Antonio. And more importantly, how to move on. In the days that followed reading the letter, the atmosphere in Clara's house was one of heavy silence, as if every word Antonio didn't say echoed off the walls. Asterisk. Joe spent hours sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon, trying to understand how a man so physically present could be so emotionally absent. "He's always been like this," he said, finally breaking the silence. "But I never imagined it was for something so big." Clara, in turn, began to question every moment she shared with Antonio. She remembered the nights when he would stand at the window, staring into space as if lost in thought. Now she understood that perhaps he was thinking about Maria and the son he had left behind. "He kept all this bottled up for so many years," she said, her voice full of pain. "Did he think he couldn't trust us, or did he simply not know how to talk?" Lucas, on the other hand, was at an emotional crossroads. He felt a mixture of anger and compassion for Antonio. On one hand, he wanted to blame the man for abandoning his mother and for never trying to get to know him. On the other, he could feel the pain in the words of the letter, the weight of the guilt that Antonio carried. "I wish I could ask him why he didn't have the courage," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to know if he thought of me, even if he didn't have the courage to reach out to me." The tension between the conflicting feelings was palpable. Clara could tell that Lucas was struggling to find his place in this fractured family. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said softly. "Maybe what matters is not what he did or didn't do, but what we can do now, for ourselves, and maybe for him." Clara's words brought new perspective, but they also raised more questions. How do we heal wounds that span generations? It was a quiet afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to set, when Clara and Lucas finally sat together in the living room. The atmosphere was lighter, as if the weight of the silence was beginning to give way to something new. "I know I can't change what happened," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "But maybe we can find a way to move on. For us, and for him." Lucas looked at her, surprised. He had expected anger, resentment, maybe even rejection. Instead, he found compassion. "Don't you feel hate?" he asked hesitantly. Clara shook her head slowly. "Hate only hurts us more," she replied. Antonio was a man full of flaws, but he was also human. He made mistakes, yes, but I think he paid for them every day of his life. What we can do now is decide whether we are going to let those mistakes define who we are. Clara's words touched something deep inside Lucas. He realized he was carrying a hurt he had never named, a pain that came from years of absence and unanswered questions. But now, as he listened to Clara talk about forgiveness, he began to see a different path. "Maybe I need to forgive him," Lucas said, more to himself than to her. "Not for him, but for myself. Because carrying this weight is suffocating me." Meanwhile, Joe was in the room that had belonged to Antonio, looking at the few things that remained of him. He was holding an old photograph where Antonio was smiling next to Clara and the children. It was rare to see that smile, but there, it was frozen in time. Joe felt a pang of sadness as he realized he had never really known the man behind that image. "Why didn't you say anything, Dad?" he murmured, his eyes welling up. "Would I have understood? Or would I have judged you like I always did?" The journey for each of them was just beginning. Forgiveness was not something that happened overnight. It was a process full of ups and downs. But for the first time, they were beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And that light came not only from the past, but from the choices they were about to make in the following days. Something changed in the dynamic between Clara, Lucas, and Joe. It was as if the weight of Antonio's secret, previously an insurmountable obstacle, now became a bridge that connected them. They began to talk more openly about him, sharing memories and impressions, trying to piece together the puzzle of the man who had been so mysterious to all of them. He was always like this, Joe said during one of these conversations. Distant, but present at the same time. "I thought it was because he didn't care. But now I see that maybe it was for another reason." Clara nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "He carried a lot of pain, and that kept him away from us. But that doesn't mean he didn't love us. It's just that he didn't know how to deal with it all." Lucas listened intently, feeling part of their story for the first time. He realized that despite Antonio's difficult choices, there was something that united them all: the search for connection. "I think he wanted to be better," Lucas said, his voice soft but full of conviction. "And maybe the best way to honor him is to try to be better ourselves. Not by hiding our mistakes, but by learning from them." This idea resonated deeply with everyone. They decided to do something to honor Antonio in a meaningful way. Clara suggested planting a tree in their backyard, symbolizing growth and renewal. "A tree is strong, but also fragile," she said. "Just like him, just like all of us." Lucas agreed, adding, "It can grow along with our family too. Like something he left for us, even without knowing it." As they dug the soil to plant the tree, each of them placed something personal. Inside the hole, Clara, a letter she had written to Antonio. Joe, an old photograph of the two of them together. And Lucas, the unsent letter they had found among his belongings. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried meaning. Together, they covered the roots with soil, as if burying the painful past and cultivating something new. As they watched the small sapling sway in the wind, Clara said, "This doesn't erase what happened, but it gives us hope. His legacy may not be perfect, but it can be something that helps us grow. And for the first time, they felt ready to move forward, not as strangers, but as family. As the weeks passed, Lucas began to visit Clara and Joe more often. He was no longer a stranger. Now he was someone who brought with him a new perspective on the man they all loved, and who also confused them. "I never had a big family," Lucas said during one of these visits, "but being here makes me feel part of something bigger." Clara smiled, realizing how much meaning that simple statement held. She knew Lucas was trying to fill a void in his life, just as she had after Antonio's death. John, on the other hand, was beginning to see his father in a new light. He had always judged Anthony by his silence and distance, but now he understood that silence hid a deep pain. "I always thought he was cold," John confessed to Clara one quiet afternoon. "But now I see that he was just lost, trying to deal with things that even I couldn't understand." Clara placed her hand on his, offering comfort. "No one is perfect, my son. Not him, not us. But maybe what matters is how we choose to move forward." That conversation marked a turning point for John. He decided that he wanted to be more present in Clara and Lucas's lives, just as he wished Anthony had been for him. "I think we should start getting together more often," he suggested. "Not just for Dad's sake, but for ourselves. Maybe it's time for us to build something new together." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and they began planning small get-togethers, sharing meals and stories, some about Anthony, some about their own lives. Lucas, for his part, began to realize that his presence there was not only a search for answers, but also an opportunity to start over. He felt that by meeting this family, he was finding something he had always lacked, a sense of belonging. And although there were still unanswered questions about Antonio, he knew that the real gift was the connection he was building with Clara and Joe. Over time, the topic of forgiveness began to emerge in their conversations more explicitly. It was something they all felt, but were still learning to express. It was during one of these meetings that Clara decided to share something she had been keeping inside. "I spent years wondering why Antonio was so distant," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "But now I realized that I was distant too. I never asked him what he was feeling. I just accepted his silence as part of who he was." This confession surprised both Lucas and Joe. They had always seen Clara as the rock of the family, someone who held everything together, even when things seemed to fall apart. But now they understood that she carried her own wounds too. "You don't have to blame yourself, Mom," John said, placing his hand over hers. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we're trying to fix them now." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. She knew John was right, but she also knew that the true power of forgiveness wasn't just in forgiving others, it was in forgiving herself. Lucas, who until then had kept much of his pain to himself, finally found the courage to open his heart. "I spent years angry at him," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Angry for abandoning my mother, for never trying to get to know me. But now I see that he was human too, full of fears and doubts. And maybe I need to forgive him in order to move forward." That statement touched both Clara and John deeply. They realized that forgiveness wasn't just about Antonio. It was about themselves. It was about freeing themselves from the shackles of the past and choosing to live a lighter, more compassionate life. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Clara said, her voice firm but gentle. "It means acknowledging that we are all imperfect and that we deserve a second chance." That night marked a new chapter for all of them. They began to understand that Antonio's legacy was not just about the secrets he left behind, but about the opportunity for healing and growth he had inadvertently provided. Together, they were learning that forgiveness was the key to transforming pain into something beautiful. As time passed, something remarkable began to happen. This fractured family was rebuilding itself. It was no longer just about Antonio or his secrets. It was about them, Clara, Lucas, and Joe, and the way they chose to live their lives from that moment on. They began to open up to each other in ways they never had before, sharing not only stories about Antonio, but also their own struggles and dreams. "I always felt like I had to be strong for everyone," Clara said during one of those heartfelt conversations. "But now I realize that being strong also means asking for help when we need it." Joe nodded, feeling inspired by her vulnerability. "I always hid behind my work because I thought no one would understand my doubts," he confessed. "But being here with you is teaching me that I don't have to face everything alone." Lucas, for his part, was discovering something he had never experienced before: the true meaning of having a family. He began to share more about his life, talking about the challenges of growing up without a father and how it shaped his perspective on the world. "I always wondered if I was worthy of love," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "But being here with you makes me feel like I am, that I am part of something bigger." This exchange of vulnerability created a deep connection between them. They began to realize that while the past had been marked by silences and secrets, the present could be different. They were choosing to be honest with each other, supporting each other through the hardships and celebrating the small victories. It was as if they were building a new home, one where everyone had space to be who they truly were. Clara smiled as she looked at Lucas and Joe, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this moment. "You know, maybe Antonio left us more than we thought," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He left us the chance to reconnect, to build something new together. And that's a gift." As Clara, Lucas, and Joe continued to reconnect, something surprising began to happen. Their healing journey was inspiring others around them. Friends and neighbors who had previously seen this family as reserved and distant began to notice the change. They noticed something was different in the air, an energy of compassion, vulnerability, and acceptance that seemed to rub off on everyone. They came into contact with Dot. It was during a get-together with close friends that Clara realized the impact they were making. "I always thought our story was ours alone," she said, as she shared some of the lessons they had learned about forgiveness and starting over. "But now I see that by talking openly about our struggles, we are helping others face theirs." One friend said, tearfully, "You have made me realize that I am not alone, that I can ask for help without fear of being judged." Lucas also began to notice the impact of his words and actions. He began sharing his story with coworkers and even in support groups for young people who grew up without parents present. "I used to think my story was a burden," he said on one such occasion. "But now I see that it can be a bridge to connect people, to show that no matter how difficult the past is, there's always hope to start over." Joe, in turn, found ways to apply these lessons to his professional life. He began to be more open with his colleagues, admitting when he needed help or was overwhelmed. "Before, I thought showing weakness was a sign of defeat," he told Clara in a heart-to-heart. "But now I know it's exactly the opposite. It's a sign of strength, because it shows that we trust people enough to be ourselves." This extension of their personal transformations to the world around them brought a new dimension to their journey. They realized that by healing their own wounds, they were helping others do the same. It was as if Antonio, even in his absence, had left a legacy of transformation that went far beyond what any of them could have imagined. Clara smiled as she watched it all unfold. Maybe that's Antonio's true legacy, she said, looking at Lucas and Joe. Not the secrets he kept, but the chance he gave us to build something new, something that touches other lives. Months after Antonio's death, Clara had an idea that would leave a lasting impression on all of their lives. I think it's time we do something to celebrate what he left us, she said during a quiet conversation at the dinner table. Not just the secrets or the pain, but the chance to reconnect and grow together. Lucas and Joe were thrilled to hear the idea, and they immediately began thinking about how they could do this in a meaningful way. They decided to organize a gathering in Clara's backyard, where the small tree planted in Antonio's honor was already beginning to grow stronger. They invited close friends, neighbors, and even co-workers of Lucas and Joe, people who had been touched by the family's healing journey. It was as if they were creating a safe space where everyone could share their own stories of forgiveness, overcoming, and starting over. On the day of the gathering, the backyard was decorated simply, but full of meaning. There were old photos of Antonio, some words written by Clara about what they learned from that journey, and even a copy of the letter he never sent, displayed in a simple frame. As the guests began to arrive, the atmosphere was light and emotional. Each person there had their own story to tell, but they also felt like they were part of something bigger. It was in the middle of the meeting that Clara decided to say a few words. She stood up, holding a glass of water, and looked around, her eyes shining with emotion. "Today we are not here just to remember Antonio," she said, her voice firm but soft. "We are here to celebrate what he taught us, even if he may not have realized it. He showed us that we are all human, full of flaws and imperfections, but also full of potential to grow and connect." Lucas and Joe exchanged emotional glances as Clara continued. "This tree we planted is more than a tribute to him. It is a symbol of everything we have built together since then. Of all the bridges we have built, the forgivenesses we have given, and the lives we have touched. And today, I want to invite each of you to be a part of that too. Because Antonio's legacy is not just ours. It can be all of ours." Clara's speech resonated in the hearts of everyone present, touching something deep within each person. Inspired by her words, some of the guests began to share their own stories, moments of pain, forgiveness, and new beginnings that they had never spoken about before. It was as if the safe space created by the family had given everyone permission to open up. An older woman, a longtime friend of Clara's, was the first to speak. "I've always held a grudge against my brother," she said, her voice shaking. "He hurt me so many years ago, and I've never been able to forgive him. But today, listening to you talk about Antonio and forgiveness, I realize that I'm tired of carrying this burden. Maybe it's time to try to fix it." Her testimony moved everyone, and others began to speak up. A young co-worker of Lucas's shared about the difficulty of growing up without a father figure. "I always thought I was the only one who felt this way," he said, his eyes welling up. "But listening to your story, Lucas, I realized that I'm not alone, and maybe I can start to forgive myself for feeling this pain." Lucas smiled, feeling grateful to have inspired someone with his vulnerability. Joe was also surprised by the impact of the stories shared. A friend of his, who had always seemed confident and secure, revealed that he had been struggling with anxiety and fear of asking for help. You talked about being vulnerable at work, and it touched me, his friend said. I never thought I could admit it, but now I see that it's exactly what I need to do. As the stories continued to flow, the backyard became a sanctuary of healing. Each shared word was like a pebble thrown into a still lake, creating ripples that touched everyone around. Clara watched with tears in her eyes, feeling that this moment was so much bigger than anything she could have imagined. They weren't just celebrating Antonio. They were building something new together. I never imagined this would happen, Joe said to Lucas during a pause. But now I see that our journey isn't just about us. It's about all these people too. About how we can help each other move forward. In the days that followed, Clara, Lucas, and Joe felt something shift inside them, something deep and lasting. It was as if the weight of the past had been replaced by a sense of renewed purpose. They realized that this journey wasn't just about understanding Antonio or processing his absence. It was about how his story had touched others and inspired meaningful change. I always thought a person's legacy was something concrete, Clara said during a quiet conversation on the porch as she gazed at the small tree they had planted in Antonio's honor. A house, a business, maybe even children. But now I see that true legacy is much more than that. It's the impact you leave on the people around you. It's the way your life inspires other lives to be better. Lucas nodded, feeling deeply touched by her words. Antonio may never have met me, he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. But somehow he brought me here. He gave me this family, these people who are now part of my life. And that is more valuable than anything material. John nodded, realizing that Luke was right. He also taught me something important, John added. That we don't have to be perfect to be loved. That we can make mistakes and still leave something positive behind. They began to see that Anthony's legacy was not just in the secrets he kept or the mistakes he made. It was in the lessons his story provided, in the connections that were rebuilt and the lives that were touched. It was as if he had planted an invisible seed, which was now blossoming in unexpected ways. Clara smiled as she looked at Luke and John, feeling immense gratitude for that moment. Maybe that's what Anthony's true legacy is, she said, her voice full of tenderness. Not what he did or didn't do, but what we learned from him. And what we're doing now to honor him by transforming our pain into something beautiful. As the days passed, Clara, Lucas, and Joe began to realize that while their healing journey had reached an emotional climax, it wasn't over. In fact, they were just at the beginning of something much bigger, an ongoing cycle of learning, growing, and connecting. Each day brought new opportunities to practice what they had learned. Forgiveness, vulnerability, empathy, and love. I used to think healing was something that happened all at once, Clara said one quiet afternoon as she watched the tree planted in Antonio's honor sway in the wind. But now I see it's an ongoing process. It's like taking care of this tree. It needs attention, patience, and love every day. Lucas smiled, feeling inspired by her words. I think it's the same with people, he added. We can't just solve everything all at once. We have to keep working at it, day after day. Joe, for his part, began to see his own life in a new light. He realized that Antonio's legacy was not just about the past, but also about the future. Maybe our role now is to continue sharing what we've learned, he said, his voice filled with determination. To show others that no matter how difficult the path, there is always hope. That we can transform our pain into something that helps others. They decided that they would continue to meet regularly, not only to celebrate Antonio's legacy, but to support each other on their individual journeys. They also planned to expand the healing circle they had created, organizing more gatherings, where others could share their stories and find comfort in human connection. It was as if they were building a support network that transcended generations, families, and experiences. Later that afternoon, Clara looked at Lucas and Joe, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "You know," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion, "maybe Antonio's true gift was giving us this chance to grow together. To learn that even in the greatest loss, we can find something beautiful. And that love, in the end, always finds a way to connect us." This story reminds us that life is made up of choices, mistakes, and secrets, but also of opportunities to heal, reconnect, and transform. Antonio's legacy was not perfect, but he left something valuable: the chance for his family and everyone around him to learn about forgiveness, resilience, and the power of human connection. What about you? Have you ever been in a similar situation? Or perhaps you know someone who is going through a healing journey. Share your story in the comments, who knows? Maybe your experience will inspire others to move forward. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone special. Asterisk.